It is time to turn our attention to rugby. Neil Tracy, a very good morning to you.
Morning, guys.
So the tight five this week, we were going to do Munster in at number 2 here, but we may just bump them up to the very top here, Neil, because you'll have seen the story on the back of the Irish Independent that they face a fight to keep Stephen Larkham. Does this rub salt in the wounds of Saturday afternoon from your perspective?
Yeah, possibly. If he was to leave, it would be a big disappointment, because I think while it was disappointing to lose against Toulouse on Saturday for so many Munster fans, I think there definitely was a realisation, and we did actually get to see some of the attacking stuff that Stephen Larkham, has brought over the last couple of years. It was one of the first times in a really, really big game that we got to see it as well. So, look, I'm sure it would be a massive draw for him. The Waratahs are an absolutely enormous club. Potentially, though, looking deeply through it, they do seem to be a bit of a basket case of an organisation at the moment. There was an exit interview done with Rob Penny in one of the big Australian newspapers a couple of weeks ago, and he pretty much went to town on the organisation and the way it was run, and how there really isn't a coach out there that can solve the problems, because there is so much going wrong at board level and governance level at the club and at the franchise. So who knows? Maybe that might be enough to keep Stephen Larkham in Ireland, and maybe the taste of what they kind of got on Saturday would just give Larkham a little taste of, that's the potential that's there with Munster. If they can just get those final couple of pieces and put them together. Obviously still has 1 year left on his deal, but as we've seen in the past, there are those break clauses as well for coaches. Yeah,
very much so. Break clauses that Pat Lam and Rassie Erasmus have taken advantage of in the past. It is a conflicting feeling, I'd imagine, Neil, after Saturday. You mentioned a really good performance, I thought. Maybe on a different day, Munster do get into the next round of the Champions Cup and everything seems rosy this morning. But that's not what happened. And speaking to Keith Wood on the show yesterday morning, I know you were beside him on commentary, he was definitely edging towards the idea that a bigger conversation around Munster rugby needs to happen, namely when it comes to a director of rugby and who's actually making the coherent decisions at the club. Do you go along with that, Neil, that those wide conversations around the province need to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of it, actually, to be honest. I think we're getting to a stage with the game of professionalism where director of rugby seems to be commonplace now, that you do need someone just with the kind of umbrella to overlook the entire association. Look at the way things are at La Rochelle with Ronan O'Gara at the moment, where he can really focus himself on the coaching, and he has someone like John O'Gibbs who's doing the director of rugby work. And I think in the past you would have seen someone like Stuart Lancaster talk about how being in charge of England, it was essentially like being that head coach and director of rugby all in one, where he wasn't able to spend as much time down on the pitch with the players sorting out those things. And that's the sort of thing he's been able to do at Leinster. There is an element, I think, at Leinster of, even though the titles are different, there certainly is the feel anyway, and it looks from the outside almost that Leo Cullen is doing that director of rugby work with Stuart Lancaster more involved in the coaching. So I think it's an interesting way to go. I think it was a disappointment, obviously, losing for them on Saturday and for so many of the fans. But I think it was a much different type of disappointment than the game against Leinster the previous week. I think for most people anyway, there was just this realisation on Saturday that Munster played probably about as well as they could have and about as well as they were capable of. Ultimately, though, they just were beaten by a better team on the day, and that was Toulouse. Munster absolutely gave it to Toulouse. They asked so many questions of them, and on each occasion, Toulouse came back and had an answer. All of their best players had really, really good performances. Antoine Dupont, unbelievable. Roman Ntamack was outstanding in attack, and also his aerial ability was brilliant as well. Munster pumped a lot of kicks into him. He was hanging back quite deep, and he answered every single one perfectly, and even counter-attacked on some of them. Then you look at the forwards they had, like their front row excellent. There were only 2 scrums in the entire game, so there wasn't really much to read into scrum-wise. But just around the park, like the Cyril Boy, Julian Marchand had a couple of huge turnovers, and being able to bring on guys like Dorian Aldegheri at tight head prop in the second half. And I think that's probably where the difference was in that last 20 minutes, half an hour, that the sheer physicality and size of players that Toulouse were able to bring off the bench, real collision winners that ultimately just drained the energy out of Munster a little bit. and gave Toulouse enough go forward ball that they were able to throw the offloads. Like, I think the only big difference in the stats at the end of the match where Toulouse threw, I think it was 22 offloads, Munster threw, I can't remember exactly, might have been 6 or 9 or something along those lines. And in theory, you could say, well, why aren't Munster throwing more of those offloads? The fact of the matter was that Toulouse were winning those collisions. And when you win collisions and get over a gain line and have a tackler going backwards, that's when you're able to throw those offloads a little bit more.
Yeah, 22 offloads is an absolutely extraordinary stat, isn't it? And like, it does make a massive difference when not only are you coming up against players who are probably the best in the world in their position, but they're also on song. Like, some days they can have an off day when they come to Thomond Park. The problem was that the sun was beating down, there was no supporters in the stands, and they kind of had their own rub of the green a little bit. I know we're going to be a little bit tight for time here, Neil, so let's just skip on to Exeter against Leinster. Do we want to focus on Exeter here a little bit and how much they've come on since the 2017 meetings against the sides? Obviously, champions of the competition and a completely different animal.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think there was a perception of Exeter for pretty much up until last year, actually, that they just couldn't figure out European rugby just at that last little bit. They were, stumbling at pool stages quite a lot. And I think in the 2018-19 season, when they came up against Munster, we really saw the grittiness of Exeter, where they besides played out those 2 draws. I was at one of those over in Sandy Park in Exeter, and they're just a really, really ruthless and I think traditional side as well. And I think last year getting over the line, and even if they hadn't won the final, I think last year they had finally cracked how to kind of approach European rugby. But they're an absolutely wonderful team. I think what we're going to see this weekend against Leinster is a lot of collisions. It's going to be territory based. I think the key for Leinster basically is to control the territory of the match, because Exeter are pretty much as good as, I would say, anyone in the world. They might even be the best in the world at executing their chances when they get into the 22 and when they get the territory. Their attacking game close to a try line is absolutely brilliant, because just to go back on Toulouse, they have so many of these big collision winners. They're so hard to stop from inside 5 metres from the try line. They have the likes of, even in the front row, Thomas Francis, Luke Cowan-Dickie, Ben Moon, Harry Williams. Back to the second row, Johnny Gray, Johnny Hill, England international over the last couple of years as well. And then Sam Simmons, who's been an absolute star at number 8 for a few years and is one of those players in the Exeter squad that just isn't getting the recognition he deserves at all on the England stage and on the test stage. So they're so ruthless when they get into the 22. The key for Leinster is going to be controlling territory, keeping Exeter down in around that middle third of the pitch, or even pinned down into their own half as much as possible. It's going to be a brilliant game. Arguably the 2 best teams in Europe at the moment.
Well, I was going to ask, who is the best team in Europe at the moment, in your view? You think they're both playing on Saturday? It's
very hard to call. Honestly, it is. I would say it's, on any given day, it is any one of Exeter, Leinster, Racing 92 and Toulouse. I think any one of those 4 teams could beat the other on a given day. It's very hard to absolutely nail down and say one in particular is better than the other.
It's really looking at this point that Leinster are just the complete outliers when it comes to the Pro 14. A really poor weekend all told for those teams who are still clinging to the idea that the league might actually be able to go toe-to-toe with the Premiership in the top 14. It really isn't, Neil, with the exception of Leinster and maybe Munster on a really good day.
Yeah, I think the way the format had to go this year, where they had to cull the rest of the pool stages and bring in a last 16. The fact that you had a last 16 and a knockout round, you had more Pro 14 teams than you normally would have, the likes of Edinburgh and Scarlets making it through. And I think in the end, it actually just did what it did was it pitted teams together in knockout matches and probably exposed the quality of the Pro 14, I think. Now, in fairness as well, I would say that the way the Pro 14 season ended, the last couple of weeks, in parts were, there were some dead rubber games. I know Scarlets Scarlets and Edinburgh were still trying to keep in there and had games to win to stay in the European hunt. But I think what you really, really saw, with the exception of Munster, and I would say you would have seen it with Leinster as well, because they had such a big game the week before, was that a lot of those Pro 14 teams just looked a little bit, they didn't look sharp, they didn't look fresh, because they probably hadn't had really, really significant games for a couple of weeks. Like we saw, particularly on Sunday. I think the weekend started off so well because we had some brilliant games on Friday night and even on Saturday afternoon. But by the time Sunday rolled around and you had Edinburgh getting absolutely hockeyed by Racing 92, and then the Scarlets taking a huge beating for the Sale Sharks as well, like that's 2 50-point beatings in those games as well. It's just not a really good look for the Pro 14. And you know, the shake up with this Rainbow Cup and South African teams coming in next season, it's can't really come any sooner, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and hopefully everybody improves with that added standard that comes from the Southern Hemisphere now. Just one last thing then, Neil, on the Challenge Cup, you're making Ulster favourites?
Oh, I'm not anyway. I think the bookmakers themselves are making Ulster favourites, and rightly so. Look, they absolutely hammered Harlequins the other night. Granted, it was a complete second-string Harlequins, but Ulster went out and absolutely demolished them. The one thing that they could struggle with over this weekend in particular against Northampton Saints, it is touch and go what's going to be going on in second row. Cormac Kizichukwu got a bad-looking knee injury at the weekend, so they're light on bodies. Hopefully they can get Ian Henderson back this weekend. He missed last weekend after picking up an injury at the tail end of the Six Nations. So they were down pretty much to Alan O'Connor and Kieran Treadwell and don't really have anything else to come through at second row unless Ian Henderson is fit and available. But looking through the teams there, you'd probably make it. Leicester Tigers were very impressive against Connacht, and they've been excellent as well ever since Steve Borthwick took over from Jordan Murphy a few months back. And I thought London Irish were so exciting to watch on Friday night. The finish to that game against the Cardiff Blues was outstanding. And if London Irish don't go all the way, I just want to keep watching them play because they're such an exciting team to watch. You never really have a dull game with them.
Yeah, the Challenge Cup is the competition to watch, it turns out. Neil Tracy, good stuff.
Cheers, guys.